Hollywood has always pretended it controls the fire. Flames on screen are choreographed, engineered, shaped into perfect explosions that thrill audiences without ever touching the people behind the camera. At least, that is what the studios want you to believe. But the truth, hidden behind decades of polished press releases and carefully buried production reports, tells a much darker story. Fire does not care about choreography, and on some sets, it refused to stay where the filmmakers wanted it. It grew, it spread, it turned into something no one planned for. In the golden age of practical effects, and even well into the modern digital era, there were moments when entire productions found themselves seconds away from catastrophe. Flames leapt beyond the blast shields. Sparks drifted into rafters filled with decades-old timber. Prop explosions misfired with terrifying precision. Actors stood frozen in shock as heat surged toward them, and stunt teams dove into chaos while cameras continued rolling, capturing disasters no producer ever wanted documented. Some of these fires became whispered rumors among crew members, passed along like ghost stories told in the dark. Others were covered up immediately, insurance liabilities sealed, studio executives silenced, publicists dispatched with a single mission: erase the evidence. But every scorch mark has a history, and every near disaster leaves survivors who remember exactly how close Hollywood came to losing everything. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on 15 action films whose sets almost went up in flames, literally. These weren't controlled burns. These weren't special effects, mishaps easily contained. These were real fires with real consequences, from scorched sound stages to destroyed million-dollar sets, from injured crew members to near-fatal encounters that changed the careers of those involved. The industry may prefer these stories stay forgotten, but behind the velvet curtain, the truth always burns through. Fact 1. The Dark Knight. When the fire refused to cut, Christopher Nolan is known for demanding realism, but even he did not expect the flames on The Dark Knight to turn into a force no one could control. During the filming of the iconic demolition of the miniature Gotham skyline, an intricate setup built to mimic towering buildings and dense urban streets, the crew packed the structure with carefully calculated explosives and flame bars. The intention was to create a spectacular eruption captured in slow motion, but when the charges detonated, the blast surged far hotter and wider than predicted. Fire leapt across the model, feeding on paint, adhesives, and untreated wooden supports, transforming a precision-controlled effect into a raging inferno. Crew members scrambled to pull back lighting rigs as heat rolled across the stage, and several operators reported feeling their eyebrows singe. The studio's internal report discreetly labeled the incident a thermal overrun, though eyewitnesses described it as a firestorm. Insurance investigators arrived quietly, and the damaged miniature, once estimated to cost hundreds of thousands, was disposed of before the press could see it. Nolan, committed to finishing the film, reportedly reviewed the footage in silence before saying only, "We use it." What survived in the final cut was breathtaking. What nearly destroyed the set was never meant to be seen at all. Fact 2. Die Hard, The Inferno Inside. Nakatomi Plaza. Die Hard earned fame for redefining the modern action film, but few fans know how dangerously close the production came to becoming a real tragedy. The film's explosive interior firefights were shot on a Fox soundstage dressed as the upper floors of the fictional Nakatomi Plaza. The set was packed with glass, insulation, and layered pyrotechnics meant to mimic debris-filled air. During a take involving automatic gunfire and a simulated explosion, heat from the blast ignited insulation hidden above the false ceiling. Within seconds, flames crawled through the rafters, spreading faster than anyone anticipated. Actors and stunt performers recalled feeling an abrupt drop in oxygen as smoke funneled downward. Bruce Willis, wearing only a thin undershirt, suffered minor burns on his arms, while crew members rushed to pull cables away from falling embers. Firefighters on standby intervened immediately, but the damage was already done. An entire section of the stage ceiling collapsed, and production halted for days, while Fox executives debated how to contain the story. Official statements blamed a technical misfire, but insiders admitted the situation was far more precarious. If the flames had reached stored propane canisters on the adjacent effects platform, the entire soundstage could have been lost. Fact 3. Mission Impossible 2. The blaze that escaped the frame. John Woo's Mission Impossible 2 was built on operatic action and spectacular fire sequences, but one blaze grew so far beyond control that the production nearly faced a regional disaster. The scene in question involved controlled fire lines set across an Australian hillside, designed so Tom Cruise and stunt performers could sprint through clouds of flame. Effects technicians laid out accelerant gels in precise patterns, but shifting winds on the day of filming turned the setup into a powder keg. When the ignition cue was given, the flames erupted higher than expected, catching dry brush along the slope and racing outward. Crew members shouted for evacuation as embers lifted into the sky, drifting toward nearby eucalyptus groves known for burning explosively. Local authorities were summoned while helicopters attempted to suppress the spreading fire. Several crew members suffered heat exhaustion, and the studio faced intense pressure to keep the incident out of public view to avoid regulatory backlash. Production notes later classified the moment as an environmental flare incident, though those present remembered it as the day the hillside nearly turned into a wildfire visible for miles. The footage captured that afternoon was breathtaking, but the cost of getting it was almost catastrophic. Fact 4. The Expendables 3. When the armory went off for real, The Expendables 3 was built on the promise of explosive spectacle, but one incident pushed the production beyond scripted chaos into a genuine emergency. Filming took place in Bulgaria, where the crew repurposed an old warehouse into a munitions bunker for a large-scale battle sequence. The structure was filled with replica weapons, smoke charges, and rows of controlled pyrotechnic canisters intended to create cascading explosions. But during a rehearsal, a spark from a misfired squib landed in a cluster of improperly stored blanks and powder residue. Within seconds, a chain reaction ignited, erupting into a fireball that tore through the prop armory with a deafening roar. Crew members were knocked to the ground as heat surged outward, shattering glass and sending debris across the warehouse floor. The blaze spread quickly, fueled by wood structures and leftover accelerants from previous effects. Emergency crews battled the flames for nearly an hour before containing them, but by then, part of the warehouse roof had collapsed. Several stunt technicians suffered burns, and production halted under a cloud of scrutiny. Studio representatives immediately issued gag orders, fearing the story would undermine the franchise's image and trigger investigations into on-set safety protocols. Insiders later revealed that the studio replaced large sections of the damaged building overnight to avoid press intrusion. What made it into the final cut appears seamless, loud, polished, cinematic. But behind those frames lies a moment when a routine action setup transformed into a real detonation. The cast and crew were lucky to survive. Fact 5. Backdraft. The film that couldn't contain its own flames. Ron Howard's Backdraft is remembered for its shockingly realistic fire sequences, but few realize how dangerously real those fires became. Determined to capture the unpredictable behavior of flames, the production rejected digital effects and relied almost entirely on practical fire rigs inside massive warehouse sets. Multiple flame bars, accelerant lines, and controlled oxygen vents were installed to mimic the deadly breathing of a living blaze. But during the filming of a corridor rescue sequence, the heat reached levels technicians hadn't anticipated. A sudden rush of oxygen caused by a crew member opening a door at the wrong moment created an instant backdraft. A violent burst of flame that rolled across the ceiling and cascaded down the walls like a living creature. Several crew members dropped their equipment and ducked for cover as fire-engulfed props meant only to char cosmetically. The sprinkler system failed to activate due to intentional overrides designed to maintain visual continuity, leaving firefighters on standby, scrambling to intervene manually. The blaze consumed a large portion of the set before it was brought under control, warping metal supports and rendering the location unusable for the remainder of the shoot. Universal executives insisted the story be kept internal, positioning the film as a tribute to firefighters while quietly downplaying how close the production itself came to needing a real rescue. Many of the actors later admitted they walked away from the experience with a newfound respect for the unpredictable brutality of fire, because on that day, it was no longer fiction. Fact 6. Terminator Salvation, the battle scene. That ignited for real, Terminator Salvation pushed practical effects to their limits, but one ambitious battle sequence nearly turned the set into a disaster zone. Filmed at an abandoned industrial complex in New Mexico, the scene involved collapsing structures, fireball eruptions, and debris plumes meant to evoke a war-torn future. Effects crews laid out a series of synchronized explosions across the shattered concrete landscape, but aging buildings surrounding the set contained decades-old flammable residue grease, oil, chemical dust embedded into the surfaces. When a timed explosion triggered slightly early, sparks shot farther than anticipated, landing in a pocket of residue beneath a rusted metal walkway. Flames erupted instantly, racing along the structure and igniting stacked debris that had not been cleared from previous takes. The fire spread into a storage zone containing foam props and discarded timber, sending thick black smoke billowing upward. Crew members rushed to pull cables and equipment out of the fire's path, while stunt performers scrambled for safe ground. Several technicians suffered minor injuries, and one camera operator was treated for smoke inhalation. The blaze took nearly half an hour to extinguish, and production went into temporary lockdown as investigators assessed the compromised buildings. The studio ultimately framed the event as an effects irregularity, though insiders knew how dangerously close the fire came to causing a full structural collapse. The scene remains one of the film's most visually striking moments, but the danger behind it is a chapter the studio never planned for audiences to uncover. Fact 7. The Crow. Flames before the tragedy. Long before The Crow became infamous for the on-set death of Brandon Lee, the production had already suffered a fire that signaled how cursed the set was becoming. During a sequence involving a pyrotechnic blast meant to illuminate the night sky behind a row of derelict buildings, effects crews loaded flame pots along the rooftop to create a dramatic silhouette. The wind shifted unexpectedly, sending sparks drifting downward into a pile of aging tar paper and discarded lumber that had accumulated behind the facades. Within moments, flames burst through the wooden structures, climbing upward with terrifying speed. Crew members shouted warnings as the blaze engulfed the rear of the set, melting plastic fixtures and sending billows of black smoke curling into the air. Firefighters arrived quickly, but the damage was extensive. A full section of the constructed street had to be rebuilt from scratch. Studio executives feared the fire would amplify whispers already circulating about unsafe conditions, so the incident was documented only as a materials malfunction. For those present, however, it became the first omen that the production was drifting into darker territory. Some crew members later admitted they felt the set carried a heaviness after that night, as though something had been awakened. In the months that followed, what began as an accident of wind and flame became part of a larger tapestry of misfortune that would ultimately overshadow the entire film. Fact 8. Blade Runner. When the future caught fire, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner crafted a dystopian Los Angeles saturated with neon, smoke, and industrial gloom. But creating that atmosphere required an immense network of flame bars and gas-fed lighting rigs running along the tops of its labyrinthine sets. One late-night shoot inside the Bradbury-inspired alleyway involved heavy use of steam, machines, and flame effects to drench the environment with oppressive, futuristic texture. Hours of buildup left the air thick with vapor and particulate matter. When a malfunctioning flame bar emitted an unusually long tongue of fire, it brushed against a patch of decades-old insulation high in the rafters. The material ignited instantly, sending burning fibers drifting downward like toxic snow. Crew members scattered as the fire climbed across the ceiling beams, threatening to engulf the entire structure. The set, already infamous for running behind schedule, was evacuated, and fire crews battled stubborn flames that had crept into the building's ancient wooden supports. The damage was severe enough that production had to reconfigure several shooting days, and studio executives grew increasingly anxious about spiraling costs. Official paperwork downplayed the event as a minor ignition, but eyewitnesses described a far more harrowing scene, one in which the oppressive future world Scott meticulously envisioned nearly consumed itself. Ironically, the footage captured that night is now hailed for its authenticity, unaware viewers marveling at visuals forged in an atmosphere that came perilously close to burning the entire project to the ground. Fact 9. Spider-Man 2002. The fire that devoured New York Street. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man required a sprawling recreation of New York's bustling avenues, built on Sony's famed New York Street backlot. The set was designed to support stunts, explosions, and wire work that brought the superhero's world to life. But during preparations for a nighttime stunt involving a controlled blast, a spark from a test detonation ignited fabric awnings along a row of storefronts. The flames spread rapidly, feeding on wooden facades and decades-old structures that had served countless productions before. Despite the crew's efforts to contain the fire, a gust of wind fanned the blaze into a roaring wall of heat that raced down the narrow corridor. Firefighters fought the inferno for hours, but by dawn, the beloved New York street was reduced to smoldering ruins, one of the worst backlot fires in Sony's history. The event caused millions in damage and forced the studio to rebuild the entire area. Public statements framed the disaster as an isolated accident, yet insiders confessed the real cause was a combination of rushed scheduling, outdated infrastructure, and pressure to escalate the film's spectacle. What viewers saw on screen was vibrant, energetic, and polished, but behind that illusion was the memory of a fire that consumed an entire block, forcing the production to reckon with the dangers hidden beneath Hollywood's most familiar streets. Fact 10. The Matrix Reloaded, the freeway that went up in flames. The centerpiece of The Matrix Reloaded was its legendary freeway chase, a sequence so ambitious that Warner Brothers built an entire 3-mile highway loop on a former naval base. The set required constant pyrotechnics, bullet impacts, car detonations, rolling fireballs, and the ground beneath the asphalt was lined with fuel-based special effects rigs. During a complex take involving multiple stunt vehicles colliding in succession, one car erupted into a fireball that burned hotter and longer than planned. Heat radiated across the asphalt, warping the surface and causing nearby flame tubes to rupture. Several uncontrolled jets of fire shot out from beneath the roadway, igniting rubber debris scattered from earlier takes. The flames spread rapidly along the guardrails, licking the set's plywood structures and threatening to compromise the entire loop. Crews sprinted with extinguishers while stunt drivers maneuvered vehicles out of harm's way. Firefighters stationed at the perimeter struggled to reach the source because of the set's maze-like design. Filming stopped for the rest of the day as scorched sections were carved out and replaced overnight. The studio later described the event as an unanticipated heat cascade, but crew members recalled a terrifying moment when the freeway, built at enormous cost, felt like it might collapse into a burning ring. Ironically, the intensity achieved on camera became part of one of the most iconic chases in modern cinema, its realism forged from flames far more authentic than the filmmakers intended. Fact 11. Inglourious Basterds, the cinema inferno that escaped the script. Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds culminates in a fiery spectacle, the deliberate burning of a movie theater packed with Nazis. Determined to capture the visceral brutality of real flame, Tarantino insisted on using practical fire rather than digital simulations. Technicians prepared flame bars, accelerants, and heat-resistant set pieces, believing they had enough control to prevent escalation. But once ignited, the fire climbed faster than expected, feeding on the dense layers of set dressing, velvet drapes, and wooden supports. Within minutes, temperatures soared so high that metal fixtures began to warp. Diane Kruger and several stunt performers were pulled from the balcony moments before smoke overtook the upper levels. Oxygen levels dropped, and the crew evacuated as firefighters moved in to wrestle the blaze under control. The scene was ultimately captured exactly as Tarantino envisioned: raw, consuming, terrifying, but the aftermath told a different story. Parts of the set were unusable, and filming had to be relocated. The official account emphasized that all safety protocols were followed, yet insiders admitted the production came dangerously close to losing far more than a single location. For some, the moment felt eerily symbolic. A film about a theater burning had nearly created a tragedy mirroring its own fiction. Fact 12. The Rundown, a jungle blaze that nearly spread beyond the cameras. The Rundown, starring Dwayne Johnson, combined explosive action with lush Hawaiian landscapes, but filming in dense tropical brush created ideal conditions for a fire to spread beyond anyone's control. During a sequence involving multiple explosions meant to simulate a nighttime ambush, effects technicians packed charges along a narrow clearing lined with dry undergrowth. When the blast ignited, flames shot higher than expected, sending a wave of heat rolling through the jungle. Embers drifted into surrounding vegetation, which had been dehydrated by an unexpected heat wave. Within moments, small spot fires erupted on both sides of the clearing. Crew members frantically stamped out flames while others dragged gear back towards safe zones. The fire expanded too quickly, eventually forcing the crew to retreat and call emergency responders. Authorities battled the blaze for hours, worried it might jump to nearby residential areas. production halted as environmental agencies assessed the damage, and the studio faced potential fines for igniting a fire outside permitted zones. Public statements referred to the incident as a localized brush ignition, but those present knew it was far from minor. Had the wind shifted even slightly, the set might have triggered a wildfire that would have dominated national headlines. The footage captured that night appears seamless, dynamic, and tightly choreographed, an illusion, masking a moment when nature itself pushed back against Hollywood's attempts to control it. Fact 13. Rambo III, fire in the desert that no one saw coming. Rambo III embraced large-scale warfare visuals, relying heavily on practical explosions set in the harsh, open deserts of Israel and Arizona. The terrain was chosen for its vast emptiness. But what the production underestimated was how unforgiving that emptiness could be when paired with volatile pyrotechnics. During a sequence meant to depict an Afghan battlefront, effects crews planted high-yield charges across a wide valley floor. When detonated, the explosions generated a shockwave of heat that ignited pockets of dry shrubbery scattered throughout the area. Winds swept the fire across the sand faster than expected, pushing flames toward equipment trucks stationed just outside the frame. Crew members scrambled to disconnect fuel lines and move vehicles out of the fire's path. One generator trailer briefly caught flame, sending a plume of black smoke spiraling upward before firefighters managed to douse it. The desert itself became a furnace, radiating heat so intense that several crew members required medical attention for dehydration and heat exhaustion. Producers worked to keep the incident quiet, fearing that reports of uncontrollable fires would derail international partnerships already strained by political sensitivities. Publicly, the film was promoted as a triumph of realism. Privately, many on set remembered the day the desert reminded them that large-scale warfare, real or staged, always carries consequences. Fact 14. The Rock. When Alcatraz nearly lit up again, Michael Bay's The Rock was filmed partly on the historic island of Alcatraz, a location notorious for its strict safety restrictions and unpredictable maritime weather. During a nighttime shoot inside a decommissioned warehouse, the crew staged a large explosion designed to send a rolling fireball across the floor. As Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage sprinted through the frame, the pyrotechnic team, confident in their calculations, ringed the area with flame pots and accelerant lines, but the blast erupted with unexpected ferocity, sending flames upward instead of outward. The fireball struck the wooden rafters of the aging structure, igniting layers of dust and residual chemicals left from decades of storage. Burning debris drifted downward as crew members rushed to evacuate equipment. With limited water access on the island, fire crews struggled to respond quickly, and the blaze threatened to spread to adjacent historical buildings. For several tense minutes, the set teetered on the edge of becoming a full-scale emergency. Authorities later launched a quiet inquiry into how the fire traveled so quickly, and the studio was instructed to modify future explosive setups. Public accounts simply described a contained effect irregularity, a phrase that belied just how close Alcatraz came to experiencing yet another chapter of fiery history. Fact 15. Quantum of Solace, flames on the Italian racetrack. The production of Quantum of Solace took the Bond franchise to an Italian racecourse, repurposed as a staging ground for high-speed chases and pyrotechnic stunt work. For one sequence, effects crews planted explosives beneath a series of barriers meant to collapse as vehicles tore through them. During a test detonation, a misaligned charge produced a blast that sent a spray of sparks arcing far beyond the designated perimeter. Those sparks landed on a swath of synthetic material used to dampen sound and reinforce temporary structures. The material ignited instantly, and flames raced along the trackside panels, feeding on adhesives and foam insulation. The fire spread with alarming speed, forcing technicians, stunt drivers, and camera operators to flee as smoke engulfed the set. Firefighters worked for hours to suppress the blaze, which consumed a sizable portion of the racecourse installation and melted several lighting rigs. The studio minimized the incident in public statements, framing it as a minor setback, but internal documents revealed that the fire caused significant delays and raised serious concerns about the safety of the production's experimental effects systems. In the final film, the scene plays smoothly, the danger invisible, yet those who were there remember how the track flickered with flames and how close the production came to losing far more than equipment. Bonus fact: the forgotten inferno that erased an entire film. Long before digital backups and cloud archives, one action film, now known only through scattered rumors, was effectively erased from history by a fire that consumed not just its set, but nearly every trace of its existence. The production, mounted in the late 70s by an independent studio hungry for a breakout hit, centered on a climactic warehouse battle filled with elaborate pyrotechnics. The effects team, inexperienced yet ambitious, packed the location with barrels of gasoline substitutes, flame pots, and improvised detonators designed to create a cascading inferno on command. What they failed to anticipate was how volatile the mixture had become after days of exposure to heat. The moment the first charge ignited, the fire erupted with explosive violence, tearing through the building and sending sheets of flame shooting out of shattered windows. Crew members barely escaped, some suffering severe burns as they scrambled into the street. By the time firefighters contained the blaze, the warehouse, props, costumes, cameras, and nearly all recorded footage had been reduced to ash. Insurance investigators deemed the cause gross negligence, and the studio, unable to recover financially, dissolved within a year. Officially, the film was never completed. Unofficially, it became a whispered legend among industry veterans, a reminder that fire does not just threaten sets, it can erase an entire piece of cinema before the world ever knows it existed. If tonight's journey through Hollywood's hidden infernos has shown us anything, it's that the flames you see on screen are never the full story. Behind every controlled burn lies a moment when control slips, when danger breathes, when the truth threatens to surface through smoke and ash. These are the stories the studios hoped would fade with time, but you've seen what survives behind the velvet curtain. If you want more untold histories, more shadows cast by the brightest lights, stay with us. There are still darker corners to explore, and the next secret is already waiting.